Number 4. Santiago Flight 513. Santiago Flight 513 was reported to take off on September 4, 1954 from Aachen, West Germany. It was supposed to land in Porto Alegre, Brazil the next day. However, it never made it to its destination. The plane mysteriously disappeared. To make things even more bizarre, 3.5 decades later, the Porto Alegre airport noticed an unauthorized aircraft circling around in the sky on October 12, 1989. Air traffic controllers attempted to contact the pilot but were unable to reach them. After some time, the plane made a perfect landing, and the engines were still up and running after it touched base. You may think there's no way this could be the same plane from 1954, but what they found when they opened the plane doors will shock you. Inside the perfectly functioning aircraft, they found 92 skeletons in total from those on board. Captain Miguel Victor Curry was also all bone with his hands still tightly gripped on the controls. Strangely, officials and eyewitnesses refused to comment on the sudden reappearance of the missing Flight 513. Nobody could confirm what had happened or where the plane had been for the last 35 years. Paranormal researcher Dr. Celso Atello said that the only plausible explanation for this absurd event is that the Santiago flight had almost certainly entered a time warp. However, he doesn't seem to have any clue how the pilot was able to land the plane with such ease, given the fact that he was a skeleton. Unfortunately, Santiago Airlines had apparently closed its doors in 1956, and living executives that used to work there didn't know much about the flight and were unable to comment on the phenomena. Several government agencies and officials were said to have investigated this curious case, but they refused to disclose any information they might have found, and they did not give any indication about their investigation leads. The government also did not comment on the claims made by Dr. Atello or whether or not they believe a time warp was involved. Overall, there aren't many details about this incident online, and many people even think it was all a hoax created by a greedy tabloid. But there are records from the Brazilian aviation authorities that do confirm the Santiago Flight 513 did in fact leave Germany in September of 1954. So this begs the question, what really happened to the plane and why aren't there more articles about it on the internet? Could someone be trying to cover something up? Number 3. TULS American. A crew of 10 soldiers aboard the World War II bomber plane known as the TULS American were in a fight for their lives as they were flying over German-occupied Poland in December of 1944. They were under heavy gunfire and the aircraft was badly damaged by the enemy forces. They attempted to make an emergency landing, but in the end they were unsuccessful. The plane ultimately crashed into the Adriatic Sea off the coast of modern-day Croatia. 7 crew members were saved by local fishermen and rescuers, but sadly, 3 soldiers that had been on board the TULS American were not recovered. That is until 2010, when the lost aircraft was finally discovered near the Croatian island of Vis. For over 60 years, the decaying vessel sat at the bottom of the water untouched by human hands. Archaeologists from the Zadar University in Croatia have recently uncovered some interesting artifacts from the wreckage. The U.S. military's Defense POW MIA accounting agency supports the team's excavation efforts, and their main purpose is to discover the remains of missing soldiers. When the plane was found, the whole structure had broken apart into 2 large pieces. Brendan Foley, a researcher who had participated in the recovery effort, reported that the nose of the plane almost peeled open like a banana. The wreckage was full of tangible evidence that could give more insight as to the fate of the aircraft. In 1944, this particular aircraft was known as a sort of a local Tulsa celebrity, according to reporter John Klein of Tulsa World newspaper. It was built at the Douglas Aircraft Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was actually the last B-24 Liberator bomber that was ever built there. The men responsible for engineering this plane had even painted their names onto the sides of the vessel. Throughout its misfortunate journey, the TULS American was followed by local city residents who had most likely been devastated to hear about its unsuccessful emergency landing. When the plane was discovered, the team found some things they didn't expect to find. Among many other compelling artifacts, the remains of the 3 lost soldiers that had died when the plane went down have now been recovered. Those working at the crash found remnants of clothing items and military equipment, including a flight boot and a life vest. The remains have not yet been subjected to testing, however, they're hoping to establish a match in DNA that will link the bones to the 3 airmen. The confirmation of DNA analysis will bring an end to the tragic final chapter of the ill-fated TULS American. According to Gannon University, there are approximately 73,000 American soldiers who served in World War II that are still unaccounted for. Only 26,000 have been documented as possibly recovered. Do you think you have what it takes to be an archaeologist? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Number 2. Malaysian Flight 370. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 seemingly vanished into thin air after leaving Kuala Lumpur's airport on its way to Beijing. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, was roughly 600,000 pounds, and it carried a total of 239 passengers and crew at the time it went missing. One of the most confusing pieces of information about this disappearance is the fact that these types of planes are typically some of the most successful and safest aircrafts in aviation history. Flight 370 took off at approximately 12:41 a.m. local time. However, at about 1:07 a.m., the vessel's Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS, sent its last transmission and then was subsequently switched off. The final voice communication occurred at 1:19 a.m., and then 2 minutes later the plane's transponder also stopped replying. Civilian radar and the Malaysian military were able to track the plane's flight pattern at 1:30 a.m. as it reportedly turned itself around and headed southwest over the Malay Peninsula. They continued to track the flight as it began to fly northwest over the Strait of Malacca. Less than 2 hours after the aircraft had taken flight, the military's radar lost all contact with the plane while it soared over the Andaman Sea. And although an Inmarsat satellite that was in geostationary orbit above the Indian Ocean received reports from the plane hourly, it was detected for the last time at 8:11 on March 8th. Of course, there were initial searches done for the plane which mainly concentrated on the South China Sea, but it was determined that the flight had turned to the west just moments after the transponder was turned off. However, nothing was found in this area, and so the search efforts were moved to the Andaman Sea near the Strait of Malacca. A week after the plane had gone missing, the satellite's information with the aircraft's last whereabouts were disclosed. On March 24th, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak stated that based on the findings from the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, it was concluded that the plane almost certainly crashed into a remote part of the Indian Ocean. They even estimated the wreck to be around 1,500 miles to the southwest of Australia. If this were the case, it would have been extremely unlikely for anyone on board to have survived the crash. Even after the area was extensively searched, not a single piece of debris was found until July 29, 2015 on a beach on the French island of Réunion. It was identified as the right-wing flaperon of the plane, and over the next year and a half, 26 more pieces of debris were found on the shores of Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, Mauritius, and Madagascar. 2 of the pieces were found to be from the cabin interior, which suggested that the aircraft had broken apart. Whether that was before or after crashing into the ocean, nobody knows, and nobody's been able to pinpoint the exact crash site. Since the news of the disappearance of Flight 370 went public, there have been numerous reports of people stumbling across what they believe could be the missing aircraft. One such report in 2015 came from a teenager in the Philippines, the nephew of 46-year-old Jamil Omar of Borneo. Since the young boy doesn't have access to newspapers or television, his uncle told his story. He claims that while his nephew was hunting for birds in the jungle of a Philippine island in 2021, he accidentally stumbled across a body of a plane full of skeletons. Omar told the local police about the incident, and apparently there was a skeleton sitting in the pilot's seat with his safety belt still securely fastened. He continued further by saying his nephew took a piece of fabric to use as a blanket from the wreckage that he later discovered was a Malaysian flag. This detail from the story led many to believe that this was in fact the missing Flight 370. However, unfortunately, this allegation was proven to be false after investigators from the Philippines and Malaysia put an end to the rumors. In the end, there was no substantial evidence to suggest that the plane had landed in the Philippines, and it was never confirmed that the fabled wreckage had been found at all. To further dispute these claims, Filipino authorities stated that they had not received any reports of the incident on the island. And with no solid leads as to the whereabouts of the plane's final resting place, we're still searching for the crash site today. And the remains of those on board the devastating flight are most likely either still inside the waterlogged aircraft or at the bottom of the ocean floor with little chance of ever being recovered. Number 1. North Carolina plane crash. On February 13, 2022, off the coast of North Carolina, there were reports of a plane crash just 4 miles to the east of Drum Inlet. The aircraft was a single-engine Pilotus PC-1247, and it had apparently gone down in the Atlantic Ocean. On board the vessel were the pilot, his adult son, and 6 passengers from Carteret County on their way home from a charity hunting event. The plane was confirmed to have taken off from the Hyde County Airport and was heading south to Beaufort when, for unknown reasons, things took a deadly turn. The pilot was contacted by air traffic controllers trying to warn him that he was about to enter restricted military airspace. They made multiple calls with no response, but after a while he finally replied, stating that he couldn't say anything before because he was trying to get out and was oddly unable to receive any of their radio transmissions. Eventually, the plane was cleared to land at Michael J. Smith Field Airport in Beaufort. However, the controller let the pilot know he was at 1,700 feet when he should have maintained an altitude of 1,900 feet. The plane responded one last time, and then just after 2 p.m., reports stated that the plane was now at 4,700 feet and it was climbing quickly. After the last altitude of the aircraft was determined, all contact was lost between the pilot and aircraft control. No distress calls or declarations of emergency from the plane were reported, and for reasons that authorities could not determine, the vessel went down about 3 miles from shore. Divers discovered the wreckage, and the remains of the passengers were found inside the main body of the plane under the water at about 55 feet. Medical examiners worked alongside law enforcement to identify the victims of the crash so that they could be turned over to family members. It was announced to the public that there was no survivors of the crash. Cataray County Sheriff Asa B. Buck III stated during a press conference that they hope to recover the plane's transponder as well as the flight data in order to correctly identify exactly what went wrong. Charlie Snow, close friend of the pilot, later identified as Ernest Rawls, was interviewed by the Associated Press in February. He stated that Rawls had previously flown for Outer Banks Airlines, which is a company that Snow owns, and that he was highly trained and extremely capable. Since the crash, no reports have been made as to why things took a turn for the worse. However, all the remains of the passengers on board have since been recovered, and those that have been positively identified have been returned to their families. Still, questions remain as to how an experienced pilot could have made such devastating errors to cause 8 deaths in total, and we may never know the answer. Number 8. Die Glocke, the bell. For decades, there have been isolated reports of Die Glocke, or the bell, around the globe. It's supposedly a space-traveling UFO-like saucer ship constructed by Nazis researching during World War II. Evidence is emerging that Nazi-era Germans developed superior technology that allowed them to conduct secret trips outside the Earth's atmosphere. The bell is frequently mentioned by those who believe the Nazis traveled to the Moon, Mars, and potentially even the Aldebaran solar system. The mysterious vessel possessed an undiscovered energy source capable of sustaining travel beyond Earth's orbit. Although the rest of the world was unaware of this energy technology, it was a critical component of Germany's secret space program, which started more than a century ago. The effect zone of the bell was believed to take place between 490 and 660 feet around the vessel. Many believed strange events happened within this zone, like crystal formations within animal tissue, plant matter disintegration into greasy materials, and blood gelling and separation. The liquid fuel known as Serum 525 was believed to be the power behind the Bell flying saucer. Insiders described the fuel's hue as cherry red, velvet, or even maroon with a thick, dense, and gooey texture. Some, like novelist Henry Stevens, believed the liquid was red liquid mercury. This Serum 525 was deposited in enormous, rotating high-speed cylinders that spun at high speeds. The quick spinning, along with a charged electric tube, provided anti-gravity propulsion, allowing the spacecraft to reach incredible heights and speeds. Many Nazis were convicted at war crime proceedings after World War II for obvious crimes against humanity and abuses of human rights. Jakob Sporenberg, a former Nazi SS Obergruppenführer, one of the highest commissioned Nazi SS positions known, was one of the defendants. Sporenberg was prosecuted for the murder of over 60 German engineers, scientists, and technicians by a Polish war crimes court. He described the Nazi Bell project, dubbed Die Glocke, in his court affidavit. Sporenberg explained the secrecy surrounding the bell by admitting the scientists and engineers were killed to prevent them from leaking any information about the device to anybody outside the program's small, trusted circle. Number 7. C46 Transport Plane. After a search in difficult high-altitude terrain, a missing World War II jet has been located in the middle of India's remote Himalayan mountains almost 80 years after it crashed with no survivors. In the first week of 1945, a C46 transport plane carrying 13 passengers from Kunming in southern China vanished from sight during bad weather over a hilly area of Arunachal Pradesh state. This aircraft was never seen or heard from again. It just vanished, said Clayton Cools, the mission's leader. Cools and a team of guides from the indigenous Lisu ethnic group spent months on their journey, crossing chest-deep rivers and camping in freezing weather at high altitudes. It was a dangerous mission. 3 Lisu hunters died from hypothermia in the same region back in 2018 after getting caught in an unusually heavy September snowfall, while 2 more barely escaped death. The team was able to find the aircraft's debris by the tail number after they eventually found the jet on a snow-covered mountaintop in December 2021. There were no human remains in the wreckage. Bill Scherer, whose officer father was on board during the crash, put Cools in charge of the search. During World War II, hundreds of American military aircraft disappeared from this area around the theater of operations in India, China, and Myanmar. Although Japanese troops were responsible for some aircraft losses, Cools believes the majority of them were brought down by ice damage, hurricane-force winds, and other extreme weather conditions known to frequent the region. Number 6. Wolf's Lair. When the Nazis first planned to attack the Soviet Union in 1941 as part of Operation Barbarossa, they established a hidden military site deep within Poland's Masurian woodlands. Wolfschanze, or Wolf's Lair, was the name they labeled it. The steps to Adolf Hitler's barracks, 2 bunker doors which are believed to have been part of the ruler's private bunker, and many armored doors were found by Polish officials. The discoveries will aid researchers in determining the locations of crucial events in the lair, like the 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler. Water connections for the bunker's boiler system, pipelines, and sinks were also salvaged by excavators. The Laterba Foundation from Gdańsk conducted these investigations in partnership with state forests and the Provincial Conservator of Monuments in Olsztyn. Among the most significant recent discoveries is a carved stone with Hitler's Special Protection Battalion and a printed flag. Skeptics believe that displaying the heinous past of Wolf's Lair in a meaningful and suitable manner would be difficult to do. Those opposed to the building of a museum-like exhibit at Wolf's Lair are fearful it would become a pilgrimage spot for neo-Nazis. During the Second World War, Hitler and his Nazi henchmen frequently visited the Wolf's Lair. It was not only the Nazis' first substantial military station on the Eastern Front, but it also offered high-level protection for their fascist chief commander. Hitler was so certain his bunker in the Masurian forests was invincible that he lived there for 850 days during the war. He didn't return to his Berlin bunker until the Nazi defeat was inevitable. The structure was later demolished by fleeing Nazis. The Wolf's Lair is also a significant historical monument thanks to a failed assassination plan that happened in July 1944. On July 20, 1944, at a conference in the lair, a group of German commanders tried to kill Hitler. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a high-ranking militiaman from the German aristocracy, was a key figure in this plan, known as Operation Valkyrie. The idea was to detonate a bomb stashed in a suitcase near Adolf during a conference in the hideout. Despite the deaths of 4 other men, Hitler unexpectedly survived. The people involved in the assassination plan were all quickly executed. Have you ever heard of the Wolf's Lair? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. D-Day Ration Pack. The world's last known surviving D-Day ration bag was found in a museum, and it still has tea and cookies inside it. The assault ration pack was given to British and Commonwealth forces for the legendary Normandy landings operations on June 6, 1944. The staff of the Keep Military Museum in Dorchester, Dorset, England were the ones who discovered it. Originally found in 2006, the unopened ration bag was wrongly described as a 1950s artifact, but it was recently re-examined for a military rations show and identified as one of the exceedingly rare World War II assault rations. The ration bag was intended to keep troops going for 24 hours while supply channels were established. The museum's personnel sought the assistance of X-ray technology equipment because opening the pack would damage the artifact and its decades-old original contents. The supplies were enclosed in a waxy cardboard box to make the contents waterproof and gas-proof. 10 biscuits, 2 oatmeal blocks, tea, sugar, milk blocks, 1 meat block, 2 large pieces of raisin chocolate, 1 piece of plain chocolate, boiled sweets, 2 packets of chewing gum, 1 packet of salt, meat extract tablets, 4 tablets of sugar, 4 pieces of toilet paper, and more were included in the package. This past June was the 78th anniversary of the D-Day landings and the Allied invasion of Normandy, which were critical in putting an end to World War II. Number 4. Battery 223. A dismal concrete structure stands out on the Atlantic shore in Cape May County, New Jersey, as though it wasn't supposed to be there. The locals are well aware of what the object is, but it often surprises tourists. Dubbed as Battery 223, the structure served as a port defense battery for the United States Army's Fort Miles military base during World War II. Its construction was completed in 1943 as part of a modernization scheme that planned for defenses on both the east and west coastlines. The battery was built to resist direct blows from battleships as well as aircraft and was reinforced with concrete walls 6 inches thick and a blast-proof roof. The building was hidden by sand and soil and was outfitted with 6-inch spikes. As the conflict shifted in favor of the Allies and military technology advanced, Battery 223 was dismantled in 1944. In 1958, it was briefly used for radio communications by the Navy until becoming part of Cape May Point State Park in 1962. The place does not even remotely resemble what it did 77 years ago. The battery was erected about 900 feet from the beach. It is now right up against the water. It's also no longer covered in dirt, but plants now grow on the roof. Number 3. Burlington Bunker. The Burlington Bunker, a 35-acre subterranean facility in England, was kept completely secret from the public until its declassification back in 2004. It was hidden nearly 100 feet beneath churches, cottages, and cobblestone streets in the charming Wiltshire market town of Corsham, where a pre-existing series of subsurface limestone caverns made the place more than suitable for a top-secret bunker. The bunker was built to be bomb, radiation, and poison gas-proof when it was made in 1955 during the Cold War era to allow government personnel to continue working in the case of a nuclear attack. For 30 years, it also housed England's second-largest phone exchange until the system was later decommissioned. The Burlington Bunker could support up to 4,000 central government personnel at any given time and could run for up to 3 months with no outside contact. It drew water from a nearby subterranean lake and even had a treatment plant to make this water drinkable. It was designed for both working and living. It had kitchens, offices, washing facilities, supply rooms, cafeterias, and even a hospital. There was also a television studio where the government could broadcast public messages if deemed necessary. A pneumatic tube system helped to assist communication inside the structure. The bunker was about a mile long and contained over 60 miles of roadways, as well as a hidden rail connection linking it to a nearby major railway. Ultimately, the facility was never actually used, and at the time it was decommissioned, it was managed by only 4 Ministry of Defense staff. Its future is unknown as it still lies stuck in time, with some trying to preserve it and others believing it should be reimagined. Number 2. The Secret Weather Station. On the island of Alexandraland near the North Pole, the ruins of a World War II German outpost called Schatzgraber, or treasure hunter, can be found. Meteorologists that were stationed there kept the military updated on meteorological conditions in Northern Europe and the Northern Seas. Although the World War II facility was hidden from outsiders, it was mentioned in multiple sources. Despite being abandoned in 1944, Schatzgraber could not be fully studied thanks to the island getting completely covered with ice. When the mild winter of 2016 finally thawed Schatzgraber, Russian experts validated what the sources had indicated. Each building and its contents were documented for the first time. They displayed an unsettling team. After undercooking a hunted polar bear in January 1944, the men stationed there acquired a painful roundworm infection. When the evacuation plane touched down, one of its wheels was damaged, so it had to wait for a spare to be airdropped. When the 6 soldiers were eventually carried away, their commander had to be rendered unconscious due to his insanity. The airfield and over 600 emergency items, including tinned food, clothes, instructions, ammo, and weapons, were found after a thorough investigation. Number 1. The Burning Brigades Tunnel. Nazis realized they lost the war towards the end of World War II. They sought to obliterate a camp in Lithuania's Ponar Forest, where nearly 100,000 people had died. 80 Jewish inmates were transported from multiple sites to be exhumed and burned. The individuals assigned to this task were known as the Burning Brigade. After months of searching, the Jewish workers reached a breaking point when they found their own family members inside the mass graves. The brigade built a secret escape tunnel using spoons and anything else they could find for 76 nerve-wracking and endless days. The prisoners rushed to their escape on the cloudy night of April 15, 1944. Despite being overheard inside the tunnel, they continued past 2 barbed wire fences and a minefield. As they fled, the inmates were chased by dogs and had to avoid gunshots and mortars. 12 men escaped, and the testimony of 11 of them led to the discovery of the collapsed tunnel's entrance years ago. Archaeologists used scanning technologies to find the rest of the site in 2016. The tunnel, about 112 feet long, demonstrated the men's remarkable will to survive despite the atrocities they had witnessed and experienced firsthand. Number 3. Panol Air Park. Located in southern Arizona, Panol Air Park is the world's largest commercial aircraft storage facility. Built in 1942 as an Army airfield, it was used extensively by the military throughout the Second World War. During the Vietnam War, it served as the headquarters for the CIA's air operations, including clandestine missions that were carried out under the agency's front company, Intermountain Airlines. Vehicles rust a lot slower in the dry desert climate than they do in almost any other environment, making Panol Air Park an ideal place for storing the hundreds of retired commercial and military aircraft that are parked there. Many of the planes have been there for a long time, including several decommissioned Boeing 747s. Famous for its humped fuselage, the 747 was the original jumbo jet. Introduced in 1970 under the now-defunct Pan Am Airways, the iconic bi-level aircraft was developed at a time when air travel was becoming more popular and airports were becoming overcrowded. Airlines were looking for ways to reduce congestion and operating costs so they could lower ticket prices and attract more customers. In a stark contrast to how some modern airlines seem to operate, Pan Am officials believed that making flying cheaper for consumers was a good business move. They sought to do this by spreading the cost across more passengers by designing a bigger jet that could hold more people. Boeing had to design an inevitably complicated machine unlike anything that had ever flown before on a tight time frame and limited budget. Many joked about how management had bet the company by taking on the task, but it proved to be worth the gamble, sparking a revolutionary new era in aviation that turned flying into a common way to travel rather than a luxury reserved for the affluent. The 747 remains one of the most successful passenger planes of all time to this day. Like any other aircraft, it was eventually superseded by newer, more advanced, more fuel-efficient, and in some cases, larger planes. The last 747 to operate under a U.S. airline flew from Seoul to Detroit for Delta on December 19, 2017. 2 weeks later, it touched down at Panol Airport with no foreseeable plans to return to the sky. Panol Air Park is also home to some Boeing 737 MAX jets that arrived at Panol Park when many jurisdictions throughout the world banned the aircraft due to safety concerns. Aviation authorities began grounding the plane in 2019 after 346 people died in 2 major crashes, sparking fears about a possible design or manufacturing flaw. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration was one of the last agencies to ban the 737 MAX. By the time American authorities finally decided to ground the aircraft, 51 other regulators had beaten them to it. As it turned out, the 737 MAX did have a major malfunction with a flight control feature called Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation Systems, MCAS. It was implemented to balance out the plane, which had bigger engines that were positioned differently than they were on past 737 models. This gave the MAX a tendency to pitch up excessively, putting it at risk of stalling. MCAS corrected the issue by automatically adjusting the horizontal stabilizer and keeping the aircraft level. The FAA allowed Boeing to remove any mention of the MCAS from the aircraft's manual, leaving pilots completely unaware that it was part of the system. The 2 major accidents that sparked worldwide concerns about the 737 MAX were caused by an MCAS malfunction. But without knowing about it, the pilots couldn't take the proper steps to resolve the issue. Boeing fixed the problem and the 737 MAX is back in service, which means that the fleets at Panol Park will most likely leave soon if they haven't already. The Boneyard's plane population increased dramatically when COVID-19 reduced airline operations to a fraction of their pre-pandemic levels, filling the property with rows upon rows of jets bearing famous airline logos like Delta, JetBlue, WestJet, Air Canada, and more. Unfortunately, many of these planes will never retake the skies. The drastic reduction in flight travel that came with the pandemic left airlines scrambling to cut costs wherever possible. And even as the demand for flight travel goes back up, most companies are in too much of a pinch to fly any more planes than they absolutely need. Have you ever flown in a jet? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 2. DavisMonthan. The world's largest aircraft boneyard is just outside Tucson, Arizona at the DavisMonthan Air Force Base. It was established in 1925 and quickly became the largest municipal airport in the United States. The property gained its official military status shortly before the U.S. entered World War II, when it was used by the Army Air Forces for heavy bomber operations and training. Virtually all activity at the base stopped when the war ended, and it soon became a storage space for disused military aircraft. But it didn't become the country's primary military aircraft boneyard until 1964, when around 1,000 Navy planes arrived at the property. Officially known today as the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Center, the sprawling 1,200-acre site is home to around 4,400 decommissioned aircraft, where the arid climate helps to preserve them for possible future use. Its population peaked at nearly 6,100 in 1973, coinciding with the end stages of the Vietnam War. Today, there are around 80 different types of aircraft at DavisMonthan, and many have been there for years or even decades. Their cumulative value is estimated at around $31 billion. One of the older collections consists of a fleet of retired B-52 Stratofortress bombers that have had their wings removed. This was done as part of a strategic arms limitation treaty between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, as a way for Soviet satellites to see that America had lived up to its end of the deal and took the war machines out of service as promised. There are also plenty of other B-52s whose wings are still attached. Only 2 of the Stratofortresses at DavisMonthan have returned to flying, most recently with the resurrection of a B-52 nicknamed the Wise Guy. After being retired in 2008, it was slated to eventually be cannibalized since most B-52s never fly again after being taken out of service. But its future changed when the Air Force Base in Guam lost one of its B-52s to a fire and needed a replacement. Some of the fighter jets at the boneyard, including the F-4 Phantom II and the F-16, are being converted into aerial target drones. Additionally, the base is home to several 4-engine turboprop Lockheed C-130 Hercules transport aircraft, the nearly 250-foot-long Lockheed C-5 Galaxy, the Lockheed P-3 Orion anti-submarine and maritime surveillance naval aircraft, and more. It may seem like many of the aircraft are going to waste, but most will eventually either be recycled for their parts or brought back to life. Every plane that arrives at DavisMonthan is drained of its fuel, then its fuel tank and lines are flushed out with a light oil to keep them lubricated. This happens at what's known as the flush farm, where up to 6 aircraft are serviced daily. Small openings are covered with tape, and the aircraft is thoroughly cleaned and sprayed with several coats of easily removable paint to keep it as cool as possible and protect it from the harsh desert sun. Any jet that served on an aircraft carrier is washed to prevent sea salt corrosion, and all explosive devices are removed. Planes that still have their wings are secured to the ground with cables to ensure that they'll remain in place during high winds. Around 700 workers at DavisMonthan oversee the massive collection of planes. They work to properly prepare them for storage, maintain them while they're there, and restore them back to airworthy status if and when the time comes. Some of the surplus machines at the site are outfitted to fight forest fires or provide some other crucial service in a non-military capacity, while others find new life with the militaries of American allies. In 2019, for example, the Multinational Aviation Special Project Office, MASPO, and the Office of Defense Cooperation ODC Greece requested help with making 6 Bell OH-58D Kiowa Warrior helicopters fully mission-capable, FMC. 70 were pulled from storage at DavisMonthan, and in addition to the 6 that were made FMC, the remaining 4 were prepared as maintenance trainers. They were shipped to Greece along with the 60 other non-flyable aircraft. Just as fast as aircraft are leaving the Boneyard, others are arriving. In late 2021, just a few months after U.S. forces withdrew from Afghanistan, 24 helicopters that had served under the now-defunct Afghan Air Force came to DavisMonthan. Included among them were 7 Soviet-designed Mi-17s and 17 American-made MD-530F Little Bird armed light helicopters. Even the vehicles that never re-enter service play a valuable role in the Boneyard's operations. Every year, thousands of parts are reclaimed, saving hundreds of millions in taxpayer costs. The inventory is especially helpful when it comes to finding parts of older aircrafts. In many cases, DavisMonthan is the only place in the world that has what someone is looking for. And while no job is necessarily too big or too small, obtaining the correct materials can take anywhere from hours to months. Once a plane has been completely harvested of its usable parts, it gets cut up and crushed. Staff members often try to identify and reach out to the last service member who flew the aircraft and invite them to the base to say their final goodbyes. It's an emotional experience for the pilots, who often get choked up as they watch what's left of the machine get destroyed. Number 1. Alice Springs Boneyard. The world's newest aircraft Boneyard is in the remote town of Alice Springs in Australia's Northern Territory. Like several other famous aircraft storage facilities that are in the middle of the desert, it was chosen for its dry climate, which helps to slow down the rusting process. As the first commercial aircraft storage and recycling facility in the Asia-Pacific region, it caters largely to major airlines based throughout the region, including Qantas, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, and Virgin Australia. Officially known as Asia-Pacific Aircraft Storage (APAS), the sprawling property can accommodate almost any kind of aircraft, including the massive Airbus A380, which, at nearly 240 feet long and weighing around 560 tons, is the biggest passenger jet ever built. In terms of aircraft life expectancy, the A380 is very young. It was introduced in 2007, making it easy to wonder why anyone would worry about needing to store or scrap one quite yet. But several of the super jumbo jets have already been retired or suspended from service, and several of them have ended up at Alice Springs. There's no denying that the colossal double-decker is an impressive engineering feat, but the A380 is typically limited to long-haul flights that are in high demand. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic drove the need for the jumbo jet down even more, and in 2021, Airbus stopped producing the A380. Several of the aircraft wound up at the Boneyard during the pandemic, and more are likely to appear. Commercial flying isn't expected to return to its pre-pandemic levels until at least 2024, and the need for such a massive plane still remains limited. The A380 isn't necessarily doomed quite yet. In 2021, 2 of the jets being stored at Alice Springs re-entered service under Singapore Airlines, but the pandemic has certainly expanded the aircraft's ongoing presence at the Boneyard. Other planes also found their way to Alice Springs as life in lockdown put the brakes on air travel. In fact, the Boneyard actually ran out of space, forcing its owners to expand in order to accommodate the continued influx of suspended aircraft. The growing collection of billions of dollars worth of aircraft includes numerous Boeing 777s. First developed during the mid-1990s, the 777 is the world's largest twin jet, measuring 209 feet long with a wingspan of 200 feet. As a long-range jet, it has a carrying capacity of over 300 passengers. Just like with the A380, the reduction in travel that came along with the pandemic saw numerous 777s grounded at Alice Springs, including several that operated under Cathay Pacific. But COVID-19 isn't the only reason that the aircraft has been spending more time on the ground than in the skies. In recent years, several 777 engine coverings broke apart in mid-air, leading some airlines to ground their entire fleet until the problem gets resolved. A lot of work goes into overseeing a boneyard. Contrary to what it may seem like, storing a plane doesn't involve simply parking it and forgetting about it. Even as commercial flying virtually ground to a halt, the aircraft that are no longer being used but may re-enter service in the future need to be stored properly and maintained so that they remain airworthy. The fact that many, if not most of the planes at Alice Springs are being cared for in this manner, rather than scrapped, is a hopeful sign that the flying industry will recover to its former pre-pandemic glory. But only time will tell what the future holds. Thanks for watching. Did you ever travel by plane at the height of the pandemic? Tell us about your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.